I am about to save you an absolute ton of money if you're shopping for boots on a budget. These are 60 euros, which is around the same price as Nike club level boots, the very lowest tier. This is cheaper than anything you're going to get from Adidas League, Nike Academy, and they are more than able to compete and in some areas absolutely decimate those bigger brands at this particular price. This is the Kipsta Viralto III AirMesh, which is maybe a little bit of a mouthful, but I have been very impressed. For 60 euros, I'm not sure you can beat these. Let's kick things off with that 3D AirMesh upper that I mentioned. Now, it seems fairly straightforward to me. It's a 3-layer construction made up of a mesh middle section. Then you have this top layer that goes over the top of the mesh, this kind of honeycomb mesh pattern that's in there. And then you have a liner on the inside and probably a little touch of foam in between the mesh and the liner as well. What that means is that you have a very simple boot that is very, very soft. Now, the only downside is that it can sometimes feel like 3 different layers. You can kind of feel that this top section that's covering over that honeycomb pattern with the mesh in it isn't really connected and all at one, and you're not necessarily going to feel super close to the ball. It is on the thicker side when it comes to the overall touch and feel on the ball. But for a boot at 60 euros, that kind of softness is just something you don't get. It's fantastic out of the box, and it even continues to soften in as you go along. And it also doesn't seem to lose its shape as you wear it. That honeycomb pattern seems to hold its shape pretty well when it comes to this mesh, which I wasn't expecting considering how soft it is and considering that it's only 60 euros. So your touch on the ball is going to be slightly padded, slightly dampened, and you're definitely not going to feel super close and one-to-one with the ball. But I don't see that as being a problem when the upper is this good and this cheap. When we get to the back third, you've got a slightly more structured area here. It's not super structured, and it definitely is a bit on the thick side, but that leads to padding, it leads to comfort, and a reasonable amount of responsiveness from the upper. Again, any criticisms I have are kind of alleviated by the statement of this boot is only 60 euros, and for 60 euros, that is kind of unbeatable. I mentioned the lockdown there, so we'll just touch on it briefly. The lockdown is fine. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it. There's a reasonable amount of volume through the boot, which does impact it slightly. And the same can be said of the width, which again impacts how much lockdown you can actually get in and around your foot. But nice deep lacing system, reasonable amount of adjustability, and the lockdown is good, and for the price, can't really complain. Now, before we move on to more things that we normally talk about, such as the outsole, I want to talk about durability in more detail than I usually ever cover durability in. And that is because Kipsta have done something really interesting. They have developed this system that they've called XP. So experience. And essentially what this means is every point of experience that they assign to a boot means that is a training session or a match that you can use this boot in before the durability will fail, essentially. For example, I explained that badly. This boot has 168 XP, meaning that Kipsta say you can wear this boot in 168 matches or training sessions, which I think is, one, quite good, and also I love that they have that. Now, this is apparently tested independently in France, in Lyon, and they test it against all other boots on the market. These are their claims. I haven't had anybody verify this. This is what they say. And I think that's a really interesting thing. They're obviously not going to publish this, but I would love to see like a big breakdown sheet of what the XP of every boot on the market is. But it's a cool thing that they do, and this particular FG Viralto 3 has 168 XP. So that's a pretty cool thing to know. And so far for me, they've probably used 3 of that XP, and they're holding up just fine. So I mentioned the slightly more structured area behind this seam just here for the upper. Gives you a reasonable amount of responsiveness in the upper. Again, good for the price, very good for the price actually. And then if we take a look at the sole plate, it is impressively stable through the midfoot and heel here without feeling excessively stiff or clunky. And I think they've done an excellent job with that. Then in the forefoot, we're not getting any incredible snapback, but I think honestly, this is absolutely fine, especially for a boot of this particular price point. This is, again, better than a lot of boots that you are going to spend more money on. I have a review coming soon of the Tiempo Legend 10 Pro, and in comparison, this craps all over that. This is so much better. The way that they do it is with something they call Flex H and dual hardness technology. So this is fairly easy to work out. The dual hardness is literally these darker orange areas, and they sit on top of the main sole plate, and they provide it with extra structure and stiffness. It's like an all over stiffening system. Dual hardness, dual layer, works really well. And then you have the Flex H, which I would compare to the Lotto Punterflex technology, where you have kind of the weaker areas, in this instance the exposed areas, that allow the boot to bend and flex in those areas. And it's good, and it works, and it's so straightforward, and it's so simple, and it's a really good sole plate. Like, I'm very impressed. While we're looking at the base of the boot, let's talk about the traction. We have all conical studs, which is definitely going to appeal to a lot of people. They are fairly low in profile, so you get a good purchase in the ground. They kind of dig in quite nicely. They are also reasonably long. So again, good, really good pattern for FG pitches without being anything overly aggressive. Can you wear it on an AG pitch? Well, Kipsta do have an AG variation. They have actually a lot of different variations of sole plates that you can get. And I would say that this would be okay on a very nice AG pitch, or a nice AG pitch, just because of the length of the studs and that lower profile. So there's a possibility there, but don't try and use it on maybe a cheaper, more run down AG pitch. I think you're going to get some stud pressure that way. But overall, good, solid, really workable stud pattern. These 2 studs pushed up the front here, I think help. I might even like to see them a bit wider, a bit taller, a bit further up, but on the whole, there's very little to complain about with this particular stud pattern. It's good. Does the job. So I spoke about the main lockdown of the boot a little bit. Let's talk about the heel specifically, where you actually get a very nice microfiber synthetic suede material through the back here, which again, absolutely is way beyond what you would expect for this particular price, and a lot better than what you'll get on boots like this. Again, I've put it somewhere. Let me grab those King matches again. Got them. This is what I would expect, and this again is 80 euros. This is a lot more expensive, and you've got this kind of fabric with a lot of padding through the back. Here, the shape is a lot better. There is less padding that is well put together, and the material is nicer, and the fit through this heel is really good. I am really impressed. I would say this is at least kind of Nike Pro level model heel fit, which again for 60 euros is really impressive. And something that happens an awful lot with heels on cheaper boots, this one for example, is that they feel very shallow. You don't feel locked in, and the heel, in this one particularly, only feels like it holds you to about here. This is deep, and it feels locked in, and it supports you really well. I am impressed overall, and there's absolutely no hot spots. There are genuinely heels that on much more expensive boots that are not as comfortable as this. And while we're inside the boot having a look at fun things, I'm just going to pull out the insole. I don't do this an awful lot, but speaking of things that are way nicer than they should be for the money, the insole, you've got 2 pour-on inserts in the insole. The structure of the insole is a lot better than what you get on current Nike Elite level models. And you've got a synthetic suede microfiber style top coating, which again does a decent job of holding on to your socks, especially if you're wearing grip socks. And again, it's better in all aspects than what you get on boots that are currently 270, 280 euros. Like, I'm not saying the boot as a whole is better, but I'm saying the insole definitely is. And it just adds another element of me being like, for 60 euro, it's kind of hard to beat. Now I'm constantly banging on about how weight doesn't matter, but I constantly keep weighing boots anyway. So let's weigh these. Let's get them on the scales. And they come in at 250 grams. So they are definitely on the heavier side of things. So if you are looking for a super lightweight boot, this one isn't going to be for you. I do have a review coming up of the Kipsta CLR Jaguar Fury, like their elite speed boot, which I'm really interested to actually get to test out. I tried it on the store recently, and the upper is really nice. I'm interested in the sole plate and whether that all balances together. So if you want to check that out, click the like button on this one, leave a comment down below, and get subscribed to the channel. That one's very light. This one, 250 grams. It's absolutely not a problem. Please don't consider that it is. Weight really makes very little difference unless you get into stupid weights. So I don't care. I think it's good. Okay, let's talk about fit. And what I've done here is I've really loosened out the laces so that you can see just how wide that these can go. So are these going to be good for wide feet? Yes, they are. And even with that kind of one-piece style construction, the stretch in this is really quite impressive. So like, if you have a very wide foot, they're going to fit in these. Even the tightest bit is through the toe box here, but that might not be a problem, which we'll get into in a second. But there is a load of width through this boot. If you have a wide foot, these are going to be fine. If you have a regular foot, also not an issue. However, if you do have a narrow foot, I would probably avoid this one, purely on the basis that you can adjust this and probably get it to fit, but if you start pulling these laces really tight, you can see how it starts to crease up all of the material and crease up that knit through the middle there. Pull the right lace, James. Hold on. There we go. Oh, I've made a disaster out of this. I had such a good idea that how I was gonna show this off. There we go. So you can see how you start to kind of pull that material in here and start to create some kind of bulges and pockets, and then you're doubling up material in this area here, which is potentially going to cause you some issues with it rubbing against your foot. So if you have a narrow foot, I would avoid, but if you have a wider foot, I think these are going to be absolutely exceptional for you. And the comfort overall, partly because of that width, the amount of accommodation that you've got is really good. As I say, don't expect really close one-to-one barefoot, individual touches on the ball. But if you're just looking for something that is comfortable, that's going to fit you really well, and is going to do a job for 60 euros, there's not a lot wrong with this. Let's talk about sizing. So in this boot, I have my normal, what I would usually pick up in, for example, a Nike boot, a USA UK 7. And that is my recommendation to you. Pick up what you would normally pick up in, for example, a Nike boot, and it will fit you fine. However, there is a little bit of room on the end of the toe for me, not enough to go down half a size. But I might like to go down that half size just to get the whole thing to fit a little bit tighter, but I couldn't quite do it. I did try on the size down, and it just ends up being way too tight. But simple terms, buy the size that you would normally buy. Easy.